everyone. Thanks again for joining us for continuing the this assembly, live assembly, repair and care. We are in the afternoon with the program Unanticipated Spaces, caring about artists and caring about communities. We have two wonderful participants today, Daina Warren and Jarvis. I'm going to introduce Brian, and then Brian will start the panel. Brian Postalian is an art administrator, educator, and curator born and raised in Toronto by way of Armenia, Ireland, Wales, and the Czech Republic. As a founding artistic director of Recurrent Theatre, Brian creates collaborative performances in immersive and interactive frameworks that reimagining gathering. Brian's work has been featured on Best of the Year list, received Outstanding Direction, Now Magazine, Best Production Summer Works 2017, nomination for Outstanding Direction, My Entertainment Board. Great, Brian. His recent project engaged in game theory and immersion through audience design. Brian is a sessional instructor within the theater department at X University in the fall and has been a guest lecturer at the University of Toronto and Simon Fraser University. He completed a Master of Fine Arts at Simon Fraser University's School for Contemporary Arts in Theater Game Design and Interdisciplinary Performance Studies. In his spare time, he likes to visit used bookstores, revisit childhood video games, ride his bicycle, play with his dog Amy, and is learning how to draw and play the Armenian duduk. Brian currently lives on the unceded Coast Salish territory on the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh. From now on, Brian is taking over. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Elham. Wow, I'm impressed. I'm just going to drop you out here. Thanks so much for that introduction. Always so fun when someone else reads about yourself, which I'm about to do for the lovely guests I have on my side. Daina over here, or over here, I think I'm mirrored, but I've got Daina Warren and Doug Jarvis. Doug is an artist and curator based in Victoria, BC. He's a founding member of the Avatar performance art group Second Front and the Noxious Sector Art Collective, and participates in open actions in public spaces. His individual and collective work explores absurdity, care, non-material entities, and technology as a human attribute. Doug's projects have been presented at artist-run centers, galleries, museums, and festivals across Canada, the United States, Europe, and Asia. And he's an active member of the Victoria arts community and participates through a variety of nonprofit and artist-run centers boards, including as president of the Ministry of Casual Living. He is the acting executive director at Open Space Art Society and the administrator for the ProArt Alliance of Greater Victoria. And Doug has his MFA from the University of Guelph, Ontario, and is a sessional instructor at UVic. And what also I would mention for Doug is he's also on the board for the performance art at the Biennale. I can't remember the official title, but we're going through so many. So the Live Biennale as one of its titles, and has been working as a working board member for, I'm sure, Doug, you will say when I introduce you shortly. And then Daina Warren, I'm so sorry, Daina. I'm unfamiliar with your particular territory, so I will mispronounce many things, and so I say this with a great degree of patience.
Musquecheese.
Musquecheese and Akamic? Akamic, thank you. She's from the Akamic Cree Nation and Musqueam? I'll get it. Bear Hills, Alberta. She was awarded 2 Canada Council's Aboriginal curatorial residencies, the first to work with Grunt Gallery, Vancouver in BC, and a second residency at the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa. She has a BFA from Emily Carr and an MA from UBC. Warren has was awarded the 2015 Emily Award from Emily Carr University and selected as one of 6 Indigenous women curators as part of the Canada Council for the Arts delegation to participate in the International First Nations Curators Exchange that took place in Australia in 2015, New Zealand in 2016, and Canada in 2017. Wow, that's cool. I want to know more about that. Her most recent accomplishment was winning the Hintushin. I'm sorry again.
Letition. Yeah.
Foundation Award for Curatorial Excellency in 2018. She's currently the director of Urban Shaman Contemporary Aboriginal Art in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Wow. Okay, so impressive to be flanked by such incredible people. And I will add just about my own forgiveness for mispronunciations. The brief period of time I lived in Armenia, attempting to connect with my ancestors who never actually lived in that part that I visited, the people there could not pronounce my name, Brian. They don't have that syllabic content in their alphabet, and it just kind of opened my mind into about how we cross each other's vocabularies and cultures, and in particular the forgiveness and the flexibility and adaptation that we have when we come into contact with the unknown. And that was it's kind of one of those learning moments where I was like, okay, this is how you say my name in your language, and to be encouraging and apologetic to our own selves as we try to traverse that unknown. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Doug to get us started on today's session about carer. And I want to pull up the proper title here: Unanticipated Spaces, Caring About Artists, and Caring About Communities. Doug, I'll let you take it from here.
Well, thank you very much, Brian, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, gathering with you all this afternoon, as Chris Creighton-Kelly was defining our little boxes here in the Oye platform. I am sitting in Lekwungen People's Territory over on Vancouver Island, across the Salish Sea from where some of you are, well, from where our main operations of the live performance art Biennale located. And I've been here as an uninvited settler since 2001. I moved with my family from Ontario to here, and I've developed my practice as an artist, curator, and arts advocate and instructor, working here in this space, in this territory. Yeah, I want to just kind of, I guess, set up and situate myself again, as Chris Creighton-Kelly has kind of eloquently put, as the way to kind of be present and be here for this type of discussion. As my biography says, I wear a lot of hats. I kind of like that. That's how my practice works. I like to be involved in groups. I like to work with other people. I find it challenging being a collaborator, specifically with my colleagues in the Noxious Sector Arts Collective, Jackson Two Bears and Ted Hebert. We operated for many years as collaborators, really kind of taking on some challenging and entertaining topics. And that's where, working with that group, I got a really good experience and sense of being an artist, and working with different organizations across Canada and across in different parts of the world. And kind of just to situate myself in that practice, that yes, I know the feeling of what it means to be nervous going into another community and wanting to kind of do my best work or work with my colleagues, and that kind of blinders you put on as you enter a space, and the anxiety that comes with that. So I'm familiar with that kind of space and that kind of action. But then, as with all the other things that I'm involved with, I do work with a lot of organizations and work with a lot of other artists. And that's to me is the best of both worlds. Being able to kind of present work and put things out there into the world with my own artistic research and collaborators, but also to support and pay attention to artists, to listen to what they're trying to do, to support them, and to, as I'm hoping Daina and I will kind of get into a little bit today, kind of being a part of this infrastructure, the organizations, as was talked about this morning, you know, in a really kind of beautiful and constructive and critical way, the institutions that we, as humans, as participants, that we construct and maintain and alter and shift. So I'm kind of interested in exploring that space of being one who is needing things, you know, as you perform and do projects, and one who is supportive and collaborative from a kind of caring space, from a paying attention to and, you know, making sure people have what they need in a curatorial kind of sense, or that you are sometimes protecting them, you know, protecting them from maybe interests around your context or distractions. Sometimes it's like the police are asking questions and you're, as somebody's performing out in front of your gallery, and you're like, okay, let's go talk to them, engage, you know, that kind of work that we do through organizations. So yeah, just to kind of provide that experience as a way of my thinking. And just in the, you know, it's situating myself as a practitioner, you know, as a settler on this land, the considerations that are certainly more prominent, I would say, in my experience working through the galleries and the Canadian art system over the last few years. Yeah, the considerations for situating yourself, for kind of really understanding who you are, where you come from, and why and how it is that you are here and doing the work that you're doing. And so I am kind of coming into this conversation from a you know, a place of respect, but also a place of humble respect for my colleagues, for the organizations, for the generosity of many of the people that I've worked with over the years to kind of ask lots of questions, to be, you know, to be in a place to sometimes make mistakes, you know, because we are programmed, and to kind of not leave the conversation, to keep at the table, to kind of keep leaning into what is often talked about, that uncomfortable space of figuring things out. And I guess this is just, again, me kind of letting you know a little bit about me, my practice, my sensibilities. I'm in the acting executive director role here at Open Space, and you can see the exhibition by Juan Ortiz Apuy that we just opened on the weekend and behind me. But there's a lot has been going on here at the gallery, and the passing of our dear friend Raj Sen back in March really just kind of rocked the foundation and kind of the, you know, the emotional and the, you know, infrastructure of the organization and the community that was already kind of, you know, in a fragile place from lots of stuff that went on a few years before that. But just to say that it's been a really interesting process to be with the people that were here. Like, we are actively exercising care for each other. Our elder in residence, Jerry Ambers, has been with us through this kind of, you know, quite traumatic time. And, you know, we've been quite insular in a way to how we've been managing that and how we've been reaching out and supporting each other. You know, not even to mention the effects of COVID, which really kind of laid that landscape or that groundwork for the vulnerabilities that many people were experiencing. So just to say that as an organization, as a practitioner, but working with organizations, each one is different and each one has different people involved, and each one animates different aspects of attention, accountability, and care. And it's interesting to navigate myself between the different organizations and share information or share experience and learn. I'm learning so much and so often that it kind of is, it's a space that lets me do some of the work that is maybe being done with live right now as we kind of transition from leadership, and take this opportunity to kind of present ways to look at how organizations are operating, and look at how we can be differently accountable, and look at how we do support the artists who we invite to do very vulnerable things, right? And just to bring it back around to that, like, what kind of infrastructure does an organization provide, and how healthy is an organization? And that's basically what you can sometimes see, is how healthy an organization is by the support that they provide for the artists with whom they work. And you see that in the work that gets made. You see that in the way that the artists kind of travel through that event and how they carry that on. And I think, the challenges come up, but I think that's kind of what I'm just kind of laying a bit of a background for the type of work that we are doing, and how it's, in a practical sense, what we're doing. So yeah, just to say, and I've posted for kind of consideration for the audience participants on the platform. But Daina and I will talk a little bit about, kind of on a, across the country and with our colleagues, our networks. I've mentioned many, that the organizations I work with are part of the Artist One Center network here in Canada. And there's a Randy Gledhill, the previous director of Live, put together a performance art presenters group, kind of an advocacy group that met every few years at different festivals. And so I've posted in the platform a list of many of those organizations. It's not a comprehensive list of everyone who presents performance art, but it gives you a sense of the variety of organizations and the network that supports the art form that we are talking about. So I've posted that there, and I encourage you to browse, and maybe you've performed at some of them, maybe you know the people, but that's kind of a bit of my contribution to just this network that we're going to be talking a bit about, and organizations. Yeah. So I'll stop there. I've got some other links for projects to do with open space, but I'll kind of contribute those and talk about those a bit more as we get into the conversation.
Thanks, Doug, for getting us started. I have some follow-ups, but I think what would be great is getting Daina into conversation so that some more things can emerge between both the two of you and the three of us, and then the however many people are on this session together. So for anyone else who have some sort of follow-ups to Doug as well, just to note those down, and I'm going to pass it over to Daina to continue the instigation of this conversation.
Okay. Well, I just have to say a huge thank you to a really amazing sharing of information. Those are some heavy hitters that we're following, and I'm the last one to present, so no, I don't feel the burn right now, but I'm going to try and possibly add to the conversation. I do just want to do a land acknowledgement. As Brian mentioned, I am from the Agamic Montana Cree Nation, and my traditional territory is Treaty 6 in central Alberta, Musqueam. So I am in Winnipeg right now, and we've got a big old landing acknowledgement that we have to always adhere to, as I am considered also still a guest on their treaty. It's Treaty 1 territory. It's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and it's also the homeland of the Métis Nation. So there's a lot of peeps hanging out where I am currently living and working in. Yeah, so God, I got tons of things, and I feel like I use too much. We'll see how far I get through some of this stuff. But yes, once again, I just want to thank you, Brian, for all the work that you've done. Thank you, Live, for inviting me. Thank you, Doug, and our other cohort. I'm so sorry, Ellen, for being part of this with me. This is really great. So my history with Live goes way back, and pretty much when I started curating is the exact moment they were creating Live. And so I had a really nice conversation with Peter Morin, which was one of my first projects with Live a long time ago. but I was at the very first one before it became a biennial, and they did a performance at the theater downtown, and I was just newly or about to graduate from Emily Carr at that time in 1999. Live at the End of the Century, that was the title of it. And yeah, so it was so exciting to see this new, well, for me, it was a new art form because I didn't learn a lot about performance art when I was in at Emily Carr University. And so it was just like a huge upswing in learning about this art form that I had really no experience with. And since then, I have learned so much through live and the amazing artists that I've got to work with over the years. So I've worked in other capacities throughout live. I was a arts administrator, curator, and I was on the board. So I filled out many roles for live before leaving in 2010. And yeah, I just thought I'd share just a little bit. I picked up 3 performances. I'm only gonna play a minute of each, but I just always feel like it's really great to actually look at the art. I know we always like conceptually talk about it and all these amazing critical thoughts and ideas, but I also love just looking at art. So I'm going to, hopefully this will work really easily. I'm gonna share my screen. I'm so nervous now. All right, and now I'm in a huge infinity. And so this is the first project with Peter Moore, and it was really great to look at this with Peter a couple of weeks ago. Hopefully you can hear the sound.
To see the blood upon their lips, to hear the snarling of their lips, and I cried, Mother, I feel a stabbing pain, blood flows down, summer's rain.
So yeah, just gonna stop it there. That's one amazing performance. Let's try this one by Terrence Houle in 2007. Portage. Yes, Peter deserves that for sure. Can you still see that? That screen, just so I know you guys are watching it.
It's a portage, 2007. Oh, you guys have a full plan. It is. See an issue. Oh, yeah. Right here?
Okay, and the second one's a two-parter, so I'm just gonna play these next few clips together. All right, so I'm gonna stop screen sharing now. All right. Yeah, so I wanted to share that. I know those are so amazing. I kind of wish I could just jump through the screen and back into those moments of working with these people and just all the things I learned along the way with each project. Because some are from very early in my curatorial career to some that were just more recent in the last few years. And I guess for me, when I'm thinking about this idea of repair and care, maybe not so much as a director, but definitely as a curator, I've always kind of tried to place myself as one of the artists, not in so much getting inside their project and being the performer with them, but I've always had this feeling of kind of empathy, I guess, to especially when it's performance and I'm there with the artists and trying to get them ready. Like I feel sometimes that I'm just as nervous as them, and I'm trying to figure out ways that I could be on the sidelines still helping out and helping them feel like that they're being supported and that they have the resources they need. And in the last live that I participated in, and I don't have one of her works up, but it was an artist I had brought in from Winnipeg as well. And when Doug and I were talking earlier, it reminded me of how this idea of like, I kind of swooped into the moment because she was really having some jitters before going on stage. And I know her partner was there working with her. And it just kind of seemed to be adding to her anxiety. And I felt it was still very important for her partner to be there, but I kind of just stepped in and just, lightly said, okay, right now this doesn't seem to be working for you. So how can we get you to like at the point where you feel like you're ready to go on stage and that you are in the moment? And, and like I was trying to tell Douglas, I can't remember exactly what I said to her. I guess it was pretty intuitive, but it was more just trying to, just trying to get her to like kind of get rid of all the noise around her and just for her to start thinking about what her actions were the first action she was going to do with the audience, and start, getting her brain just to start moving into that zone and that space. And I think that's one of the successes I've always loved about live is just that idea of community and supporting each other. Some other instances have been when I was still living in Vancouver that another thing that was a memory that Doug brought up for me was having, international participation and just even those little things of if the director's too busy with all the other activities that are happening, like having that community that just steps in, and helps them, navigate the city or, provides some sort of resources, whether, little things like food or materials. I definitely did that for Teo and Chris. They were the last artist there to present. And we had to go look around for all the materials. I didn't leave it up to just them to go and source it. And I usually do work that way with artists quite often, like whether it's been performance art or just in my own curatorial programming overall and all the mediums. So yeah, so I really try to be an ally as much as possible for the artists. And I think, yeah, sometimes it starts to move away from that. And, you know, just for me, I know it's got to be such an intimidation to be able to present yourself, and you're presenting your body out there. And it's like sometimes a little more removed if you're a visual artist, because then you got an object at least you can work through. But if it's you on the stage there, I'm sure it must be really kind of jittery the few minutes before you go and present yourself. And so I'm just gonna get back to my notes here. Yeah, I really feel like some other things, and I can maybe save some of the other ideas and things that I've worked for, because I want to make sure I don't go over my time here. We can talk in the dialogue. Other things that have come along the way, just even through what I've learned in being a director, is that you know, I've had instances where I've been trying to be a part of creating reports, especially equity reports, around just inclusion. And one of the bigger ideas that, because everybody's now in this new kind of trend term of BIPOC, and even now, like, we're trying to switch it around to IBOC, so the Indigenous Black people of color, because I think it still is that Indigenous people are still kind of catching up. Feels like we're always still catching up to something. And I think it's so refreshing to see, like, the political and artistic landscapes really kind of being more inclusion, especially with all the really incredible kind of traumatic and awful things that are coming out right now, and how Indigenous communities and people are dealing with that. So I'm so happy to hear that Live has like an in-residence elder. That's like, you're even above urban right now. We have some go-to elders that we always bring on whenever we start certain types of activities. Not everything, but, you know, if there's like big discussions happening or things that are touching more on traditional culture, then we feel like there's a need to have that support there. And these elders that we've managed to align ourselves with, they're so incredible. They're not like harsh traditionalists on if we're not paying attention to protocol. They're very open-minded, especially when it comes to contemporary art and how they're dealing with that material. They're always so interested, and find it quite funny, some of the things that we're up to. So it's nice to have that support and that understanding, but also, you know, that spiritual or kind of I don't know, soul gratifying type practices that you know, we can rely on. So I'm very happy for you, Live, that you have your own elder. Yeah, and so one of the things I was going to start talking about is the equity reports we produced over the years. I've had two instances I was part of, workshops and stuff and training. There's a lot in there, and unfortunately, I can't share the exact reports, but there are some really great ideas that maybe we can discuss in the dialogue that I can read to you, that I think are just really kind of, you know, really great ideas just to rely on. And, you know, sometimes they're a little obvious, but sometimes it's just easy ways to kind of move through a situation and how we deal with each other. And I think one of the amazing things about Live has been the diversity throughout the years of programming, and especially on such a global scale. Watch it go from just a small Vancouver activity to the huge, global international stage that Live exists on now. There's so many cultures and artists that are so amazingly part of the programming. So these are great things that have happened throughout the years. So I'm sure there's lots of really amazing things and stories that also our audience can share with us as well. Yeah, well, I've got around 3 minutes, but if you guys want, we can move into the discussion, and then I can maybe read a little bit from the equity reports if we feel like we want to move into that direction as well. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
Thanks, Daina. Yeah, I think hold on to that, because there's a lot of follow-ups that I think would be great to pull out of what you both have just shared, and then maybe those can help ground us in either a shift, or will shed further light on some things. I did just want to make a point of clarity. I think, Doug, the Indigenous Elder in Residence is at open space, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just not at live. I don't think we have that
Okay.
kind of funding at the moment.
Not yet.
You
Not
guys
yet.
know that that's a possibility now.
Yeah. But just to give credit to the open space. I want to go back to a couple earlier points. One that kind of emerges just off of, like, we had the annotating the archives curation that Yasmin had just shared throughout our break, for those of you who were there with us. And this question around, like, the ephemeral nature of how we look back into history as a resource, as story, as history, as knowledge keeping, and in particular performance being, you know, the hardest to capture in that sense. And what's been really I've felt really grateful for, as someone who is developing a new relationship with live. Almost everyone we've invited has had some idea of being like, I was there at the beginning, which is just like such a sad sentiment to say, like, that's so rare. But I guess I'm coming back to this question around care and around story. Like, how does history and, you know, what either you began with or what you're dealing with as the beginnings, or what you've dealt with in the past, and how that plays out with how you care for artists or yourself or the institutions you're within now, the lessons that have been learned through that, you know, to not put anyone on the spot, but the mistakes that emerged. I think I'm very curious around digging into, and through this recording archive, figure out what comes out of, you know, history that either we don't repeat itself, or can learn from and build, you know, like, old soil is richer. So that kind of metaphor. Dana, is that a hand?
Yeah. I just one thing that really it's interesting that this conversation still happens, of, like, the importance of documentation, the importance of an audience. And I really felt like that with Peter's performance, which is the first one of the man singing with his eyes were bandaged or blindfolded. That was a 4-day long performance. It was very, very long. So endurance is great, but I'd say definitely have a lot of people helping you, because this is the first time we did something of that long in nature for me as working with performance art. And I don't know if it wasn't just maybe just due to our own lack of promotions or something, or just the timing of the day, but Peter decided that he wanted to perform also every day in the space, as we kind of built up his machine, as he called it, the big installation that he ended up performing in the end. But the first day we started, there was obviously just me, and I think Alicia was one of the documenters for that one, and Peter's brother-in-law at the time. And so, you know, we were trying to decide, like, so hard, should we just keep forward? Should we just keep doing this? Or just try to do something different, like just start tomorrow with the performances? And in the end, we just said, no, let's just do it. Let's just do the performance. And like, even though I know that the documentation is kind of like hard to watch through, because it's so, like, all over the place and different kind of lighting levels and things. I don't know. I still feel that's super important, and be able to look at it now, because, like, even just hearing his voice just kind of gives me chills every time I hear him sing. He always really kind of just, I don't know, something happens inside of me. And so, yeah, and I think just still being able to pull off the performance, whether, you know, it's just one person watching or nobody, maybe, I don't know. I got this new idea where I want to do program performances for nature, and we'll just go out into the bush and do a performance. And so, yeah, I think there's still this idea of care, and we really tried to just keep doing something, you know, even though, you know, very little eyes got to see it. But now as we can watch through the documentation of all this archival stuff from over the years, such incredible years, I think that there's still that really important element of being able to witness the performance on some level. So I don't know if that answered the question, but
Well, it sounds like there was some degree of like, do we hold off on this for more planning, or do we go ahead? And to think of also this project as like a 10-year project, that the archive of it, now that we're looking back, has a different kind of audience, that we're looking at it in another lens, that the way of our temporal relation to performance then becomes kind of this echoed relationship of, even if no one's there today, there could be someone there tomorrow because of I guess the technologies we have. Or even, if you were to just tell the story of Peter's performance, there's something in that, going back to like Monica's like line relationship presentation of lines everywhere, that this kind of reminding me of that. I don't know, Doug, if you want to jump into either the initial question or something off of this.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting kind of aspect, definitely, of presenting, body medium based work and temporal kind of medium engagement, and where are you and how are you there and who's doing what in front of you and how does that get remembered. I think I'll just pick up on that with the idea of engagement and memory, and even just to kind of say, part of my involvement through working as a curator at Open Space, I would go to Live, and this is how I kind of started my relationship with Live early on, was coming over to attend the festival for the week and to be around and to kind of be an audience. But that turned into coming from Open Space and then inviting artists, a couple of artists or some artists that were performing at Live, to kind of extend and expand their trip to the West Coast or their trip to the region and come over and do a presentation or do an action here in Victoria. So that kind of became an extension of, first of all, just to build on the relationship between organizations and that kind of expanding the infrastructure or the care or the engagement with an artist, and with that bringing in different models, different resources, infrastructures of how we would engage with the artists. So just to provide that kind of, again, the basis of part of our discussion here. But what kind of came out of it was, for me, some pretty special moments of inviting artists over to do things that, I guess in a way kind of just exemplify that sometimes the experience of the work that artists are creating in person is what is meant to happen. And it's how we remember as the human beings that are witnessing. And maybe I just want to give a shout out to the value of that as we live in this mediated world. And, I have to admit, and I was saying to my colleagues here, that part of participating in this kind of community television show kind of thing that we've got going on is the idea that it gets recorded and it gets put out there and it gets fragmented and it, bits and pieces, and it, it's a huge kind of decontextualizing kind of action. Whereas when you're thinking or when you're witnessing things in person, it's not mediated through a device or through, other kind of systems. It's you as a body, and it's you as a participant in that vulnerability or in that kind of visceral space that the artist is creating. So, we've all seen the performances where people really put themselves out there as a body and, manipulate and do things that make you go, yeah, they're doing that to themselves. I'm an observer. But there's also that space of, the collective emotional space that is created, and that spending time with each other. And I know Live, and Randy was Randy Makiko did a very good job to kind of foster that community and inviting people in to hang out for a while. And I know that's connected to kind of models of performance arts festivals and everyone living together for a time. And it's a kind of like a, you support each other as artists through that space and that context so that you can all kind of go and present what you're doing. And we're talking about versions of that as kind of, federally, provincially funded organizations that pay artist fees. But I just wanted to bring it back to some of the experiences that we had here in Victoria, inviting artists over. Like early on, back in 2013, we invited Veston Page, who have gone on to present the Venice Performance Art Week over the last few years, and they came and they did a workshop. And in the kind of practice of artists, certainly if we talk about the economics and the industry of being a performance artist, you're not always able to sell the work in the same way that maybe a market-driven artist can. And so workshops and these other kind of ephemera, in a way, become part of the economics. And so being able to invite artists to this community to host a workshop really extends that sensibility. It gives that space for artists here to kind of participate and engage with the artists coming from Germany and Italy, for their example. But with that project in particular, it also allowed us to have a because it was a really interesting story, and unfortunately the documentation is not as great as I would like, but I'm going to put the link to this project in the platform. But it was, back in 2013, so Veston Page did a workshop, and then Tanya Doody, who's a ceramic and performance artist, had done an installation here at Open Space with some clay castings of parts of the building. And it turned because we had the performance art group, doing the workshop in the backspace, we were able to kind of, and Tanya was kind of into this as a participant, have the group basically perform during her artist talk. And it was a engagement with the work and kind of taking the clay that Tanya had kind of dried and cast parts of the building to kind of tell the story of the building itself. The group kind of came in and dismantled that. And it was a really interesting kind of experience for the artist, but also for us as the coordinators, just to blur those boundaries of where the art kind of situates itself, right? So that created a really special kind of moment in that sense. And then just the following festival, so 2015, that's when La Poca Nostra and James Luna were performing it live. And that was just this, an incredible kind of event that was at Vivo, and they had the other, big studio or warehouse space beside. Like, that was a proper event with all kinds of stuff going on. That was really exciting. But yeah, we invited James Luna and members of La Poca Nostra, Guillermo Gomez Pena, Saul Garcia Lopez, and Jessica Bellatronica, to come over to Victoria, along with Willem Wilhelmus and Janine Frejuli, to perform as in a evening of things. But that did end up being, from my recollection, one of the last times that James Luna performed with Guillermo Gomez Pena in that kind of way. And yeah, James has passed on now, but it was a great way to spend time with James, in that personal space. And he gave a talk at Camosun College, and again, just that kind of the auxiliary spaces, or the context that goes into all of, like, traveling across the water on the ferry, with like that time that's you're spending with people. It becomes a really special part of it. It becomes a part of the memory of their actions and the memory of the work. And it's special to me, of course, because I was there, but it was special to people around us as well, and to the artists. So I wanted to just kind of give shape to that experience. And then the following years we had Margaret Dragoo and Jorn Burmeister and doing the Unsymposium at another workshop, and just their sensibilities. And Margaret, getting to spend more time with Margaret here in Victoria, and working with Michelle Jakes and Joanna Householder and Judith Price through the AGGV, like just that, the community engagement that comes with hosting projects that take time to develop or take time to get to you, that really kind of expands what I maybe am wanting to contribute here, what it is that we are remembering, and what it is that what these projects and what these engagements, what it is that they put out into the world that become records of these actions and these relationships.
I'm wondering, Doug, maybe if you could just dig a bit deeper into this sense of like, what I'm hearing is like the documentation of process rather than of the final product or performance that comes out. What that long, however long it is, but what that longer period leading up to perhaps the performance or after it, what that looks like, what the values that inform that relationship, that is not as transactional as perhaps, like show up on the day, here we'll pay you, here's the venue you'll get, but that relational, time-based process that you just spoke about. Maybe just to go a bit further, even just to speak about Margaret as your last example.
Yeah, no, I think, and thank you for bringing that up. I know Chris Crichton Kelly talks about that with his partner Franz Rapanier and Primary Colors, that it's how do we get kind of used to the transactional where, oh, you get hired to do something and you've got spaces, you program, a jury selects works to be exhibited, that kind of thing. But that it's not a new idea, of course, that you build a relationship with the artist and you build that out. But I think what is shifting is that it's becoming less of just a sideline consideration and an actual theory and an actual thing that is exercised. And in that way, space is made for it. You make space for that relationship building. You take the time. And I think, as again, working with organizations and colleagues, as we're developing new systems to kind of accommodate, changes or transformations, it's one of the things that I think is coming out of all of the actions and, social justice actions and, working within organizations. It's like putting those things in front of you to say, yes, we apply for money. We, as directors, our jobs are to apply for money and curators to get projects. So put these fees in ahead of time. Don't have it be something that you're like, oh, Carfax also suggests that you should pay for installation or something, right? It's like put that fee ahead of time so that the consideration is there, so that you're building the relationship with the artists and affecting the system to say, we understand that it takes time for this project to come about, or we understand that you need to, do research, or we're there with you. So yeah, it's putting it into practice as opposed to just the idea, and not to devalue it as like, oh, now I'm building relationships, or now it's like to actually be considerate and to see I think we know through experience that when somebody's comfortable and they know who you are and what your intentions are, and there's no second guessing, there's no questioning, that the work just flows, right? And the engagement flows, and your ability and the participants and audience's ability to engage there's no barriers, right? So maybe it's a way to talk about it like that.
I want to pick up on that sense of trust and care, and to also maybe throw over to Daina if you feel comfortable.
Yeah.
This idea of the difference between asking the artist or asking the individual how they want to be cared for versus knowing how to care, and in particular the barriers, visible or invisible, that come up against some of these processes for care that what I think in the long run, it's a long strew of miscommunication that sometimes ends in uncared for people or spaces. But in particular, how you navigate or how you think institutions should or do navigate that relationship between, and that fine line between asking and knowing is probably not the best word, but like being intuitive perhaps is closer.
Well, and maybe because I've only been performance artist a certain amount of times, so I speak more from always my curatorial perspective. But even in just being a curator, one example is just I was invited to do a talk at the University of Lethbridge, and there's been other times in southern Alberta that I've been invited to do things, and just I think it just was the amazingness of them, knowing when I was showing up, the amount of generosity showed to me while I was there, having the community be totally happy to meet me, excited to meet me, and provide a space where, like I was like ready to give my presentations. And so I think that like creating that energy around, the visiting artists or the, local artists that you're working with is just so important. And I think that's when, definitely trust begins. And for me, when it's as soon as artists arrive into town, going and getting them from the airport personally, rather than making them try to find a cab and get downtown, and whether it's Winnipeg or Vancouver or Toronto is so scary. It's just like, that starts from the very beginning for me, at least. And, being able to make sure that their accommodations are set up. I mean, it's not going to be perfect every time, of course, but, just kind of, for me, I try to think ahead of the steps of what do they need to get themselves settled and get working, and get into that really awesome space that they need to be in. So, so for me, it's like just doing those little extra things is, just such a great way to be treated. And it's, like it's amazing when I get treated that way. So, it goes both ways, right?
Do you have a checklist or a internal barometer?
Good. I was thinking today, I was like, man, I should have like something set up where for every time I start a project, because usually I'm just kind of doing it here and there. So.
And anything from you, Doug?
I think I do appreciate the question and the idea that maybe if you think we do live in a pretty well bureaucratized and healthcare kind of systems, especially what we've all learned watching all the public health orders and people talking about it all the time during the pandemic. But I think what it's making me think about is we do want to have our policies and our best practices and know the parameters and the rules and how to take care of people, if an accident happens or that kind of stuff, capacity in a building. Because sometimes, yes, you are working in spaces that are not as regulated, or, so you do need to just have a general sense of that. But I do like this idea, Brian, that you've brought up, that it's more just adapting to what the artist needs, perhaps, and kind of letting that drive the considerations along with the inventory of all of the other best practices. And Margaret, I'm kind of thinking of you here, and not to kind of say too much about the challenges you had with your hips and when you were coming to Victoria, and just what that kind of, what that meant for mobility and just kind of getting around and the considerations that went with that. And I have to admit, as I've suggested, going to the live for a week, and participating in the late night activities, and just kind of forgetting that's like, oh right, I still have a week and a bit of coordinating and hosting to do, and so I'm putting myself in a vulnerable kind of position of being a little stressed out. But it was a nice kind of reminder of that kind of work, of having to really be patient and considerate for what is needed, because I think this is a general thing that I would say as a Western art educated settler kind of programmed sensibility, or the sensibility that I have, is that often the times it's when you get stressed or tired in that way, the presumptions of what you think the art form is or what people need is what comes forward first, and that's the part that you have to kind of ignore and learn to push past or reconfigure. So it really brought up just being patient and being open to the possibilities that what the artist and what Margaret was managing at that time could contribute to the art form or could contribute to the work. And I really admired what Margaret did at the time and kind of leaned into it as a way to, because Margaret, I know you had your walker there, and I'm sure you've been had another opportunity, you wouldn't have used it in a way. But I really admired that you leaned into that and used it to show that it didn't matter some of these other elements or aspects of how that might seem. It still let the work and the art kind of be exercised, right? And I learned a lot from that experience. And you know, I really appreciate, you know, the time spent with Margaret in that way, and just how it made me consider things. And you know, it's again, that's this part of this transformation that we go through as individuals, and that we then kind of translate to the organizations that we work with, and you know, put into practice and consideration. So yeah, that's, I hope you don't mind me using that example, Margaret, but it really was like a good learning experience, but also just to show that some of these things that we think are the ways they're supposed to happen really do not need to happen or do not need to be that way.
Yeah.
There we go.
And just to add to that, like a little bit, and maybe that's where some of this equity stuff can come in. You know, it is a little dry material, but you know, like some of the things we did cover was a lot of like abilities. The great thing is ageism, going both ways of, you know, expecting older people to know the digital world who might not so much. But also, you know, like there's like, yeah, the after hours activities, whether that's the partying, the dancing and stuff, and older people don't want to go to that because, you know, it's been a long day and they've taken a lot in and they want to go home. Even youth want to do that. But, you know, a lot of conversations happen late at night. So who's ever missing out on that moment of community happening, you know, how does that information get transmitted? Because I think that's still really amazing conversations that happen, and you know, sometimes people forget the next day what they had talked about. So yeah, so there's all these different scenarios of, you know, trying to still, you know, include people and try to, you know, not so much keep information to themselves, or information sharing is happening, I guess, on some level. So
I feel that so hard as a teetotaler. Doesn't drink and goes to bed.
Yeah. Yeah.
But going on that, maybe I'll get into something more spicy. To call back to what Chris said in his talk, he said he wanted to do away with EDI or DEI as he said it, and that I thought that's a very provocative statement. And in particular, when you were speaking, Daina, you said trend terms that we use in terms of BIPOC or IPOC, and you didn't say this yourself, but I think something that's emerging is the trend towards like the commodification versus care of intersectionality and of identity, and how institutions grapple with this particular challenge of being ethical for engaging in perhaps conversations that are very new for them, around a set of lived experiences they may not have, and yet not making that transactional, quota-based, essentially like institutionalizing the very fluid, complex notion of who we, you know, the identities that make us up. Big question. I know you're both gonna do well on what I'm asking. So I'm just trying to provide there, you know, where do you situate yourself in that crux, in that crucible of identity and EDI initiatives as they've been emerging more frequently in the last several years?
So okay, do you want me to go first? Just jumping in. Brain farting away here. I guess for me, when I'm understanding the idea about commodification, just thinking about, you know, grants and funds, pots of money that are out there that are available for Indigenous programming, whether you're an Indigenous organization or not, or an Indigenous cultural arts and culture worker or not, and just I guess how that gets filtered down throughout Canada, I guess, internationally. I mean, for us, it's been great, I'll say. For urban, it's been amazing. Just the fact that in the system changed with Canada Council's arts programming, and that, you know, like that it's become its own component, rather than just a few programs that were, you know, offered here and there annually. So that's, you know, it's been so amazing for us, because now we can just, you know, also make that happen to, like, all that type of funding goes towards the artists and how to produce their works better for them. You know, providing better resources, better equipment, more materials. You know, I really try to even help. If they don't quite have the project done, I kind of help them, give them a little push and a little bit of extra seed money so that they can finish it properly or have it ready for go time, right? So yeah, so I try to really make sure that, you know, all that extra, this amazing, you know, raises we've had to our operating is beneficial to the Indigenous community. I mean, we're mandated to work with Indigenous, and that's still the reason that we always have to give it to Indigenous peoples. But, you know, we do work with other like non-Native audiences and workers and artists and things. So, but yeah, I think for like when it's the other end, when it's non-Indigenous, like I really hope that people are utilizing that money to support artists that are doing amazing projects. And there's so many Indigenous artists across Canada that I'm always kind of taken aback when people, especially when all the people were getting organizations were really getting the pressure from funders to start, you know, diversifying your programming. They're running to us going, who do we program? And I'm like, there's so many Indigenous artists. Like, it just kind of was always like stumped a bit that, you know, maybe they just needed the support to decide who to go with or something. I was never quite sure, but yeah, I'm really hoping that, you know, that extra push for funding for Indigenous is happening. So.
Thanks, Daina. And Doug, as a white man, how do you?
Our ally.
I was not saying he wasn't.
Yeah, he's an ally.
Yeah, no, I definitely am aware of my presentation as a cisgendered, you know, British heritage kind of male here in Canada, educated in the university art system that is slowly shifting. But I think I want to put myself into the experience that I have working with artist-run centers, and, you know, just in that broader picture of all the different ways that we are participating, the different organizations, different institutions, different practices that we all have and share. The artist-run centers in Canada, I feel, are a very important, obviously, part of the Canadian art system infrastructure. They are, you know, open space here is moving into its 50th year on this land, and that is a big time of reflection. And it's, you know, it's easy to also criticize this network and these organizations as kind of being part of the system now, as opposed to being parallel to them as they started. But that being said, I'm still finding that it is through my participation with these organizations that I am in direct relationship with people who are doing this work, and I'm learning, you know, immensely from my colleagues who are doing this work and who are, you know, extending, you know, gestures to say, do this work with us. And I want to bring up our friend Peter Morin, because it was Peter who, you know, a lot of people know Peter from Vancouver. He is a Talton artist, and yeah, he was living in Victoria, and he said, I want to present my work at Open Space. And that's kind of, I didn't know Peter at the time per se, but I got to know them because they were part of the Canada Council's Indigenous curators in residence. So just to combine the work that we can do through the organizations with the initiatives that are presented, Peter took on that role, and I got to work very closely with Peter, and we became friends and colleagues and did some challenging work. I learned a lot, and I thank Peter all the time for his generosity and curiosity, and just letting me. This is where I would say not making too many mistakes necessarily, but you're deprogramming yourself, and it takes a little while to understand. Oh, right, all of these assumptions or all of these intuitions that I have are based on a different kind of construct. So yeah, Peter's patience in that role really let me learn as a person, as a curator, and then through my involvement with this organization to be able to put into practice some of the things that we were working on, or some of the ways to open up or think differently about what the expectations were on a project, or how to, what an artist working with the cultural kind of exploration, or something else that was outside of that frame that I had learned. It provided some space to exercise that, and then that in turn gets influenced, and then it was when Peter, their term retired, and Franz Trepanier came into that role. Then it was like, okay, let's keep this going, and that's where Open Space made the commitment to have Indigenous curator as an ongoing role at the organization, not just in residence. So that didn't just happen overnight, and none of this happened overnight. As we're talking about building relationships, we're talking like 12, 15 years of relationships through just with these colleagues. But I have been able to see, the difference in that time. And now the Open Space is in a position where we have an elder in residence, Jerry Ambers, because of the work that Peter did, and Franz Trepanier, and now Eli Hurdle, and Lindsay Delarond, and Jackson Two Bears, and other Indigenous curators and artists spending that time and working with me and working with the organization. So it is, it's possible, but it does take work, and it's happening. But I think I also want to just then to shift that by, again, this collaborating between organizations, what I've learned through the patience and energy and critical discussions here at Open Space, then I can bring to other conversations. And just to say, with Live, Live has been doing amazing work over the last many festivals, but we're seeing that, as everyone's seeing that, the kind of the cracks in the process, where the artists are there, they're ready to do the projects, they're ready to perform, but how are we actually taking care of them in that way? What supports do we have for different artists, whether it's from a mobility issue or a cultural background, or identity? Like, how are we supporting them in behind the scenes so that they are comfortable to do their best work, and that they are not coming away from it going, okay, that maybe wasn't that much fun, but it's just there's just to kind of bring it back into the accountability. That's one thing also, right? The organization's taking accountability, and as Elwood Jimmy one time said here at Open Space, it's like, when things do happen and mistakes do happen, and you kind of go, okay, maybe you shouldn't have said that or done that, it's still privileged to be able to say, okay, I'm out of here. I'm just going to take myself out of the equation. And I've learned that it's harder, yes, to stick around and to take accountability for things that you thought were good, but are not good, So that kind of like staying at the table and learning and listening, that's a big part, I'd say, of what I've learned. But I do owe it a lot to my colleagues. And Daina and I have known each other for a long time. Remember going to one of the early Artist Run Center conferences, and just building a relationship over many years, right? And that in many different places. And that's what it's my experience so far.
And just following up with that idea of accountability, I know there's been instances here, and I'm not saying this has happened with Live or is going to, but there was one time when I first started here that an artist was really upset with the organization She wrote a scathing letter to the board and tried to take it to the funders. But in the end, we brought her back for a second project. We managed to smooth the ruffled feathers that had happened, and it was something that had happened before I got there. So in the end, she knew she was working with a different group. But still, I still wanted to acknowledge, the wrongdoing that had happened, and that, that as a whole, the organization is still, being held accountable, and that we're responsible for going forward with keeping that relationship healthy with her. And so we managed to bring her back, and it's just like working through her grievances, and just trying better not to deal with an artist that way. And it was a big learning curve for us, and it's hard to deal with really kind of tense situations like that. But just always, it's really the one thing about the great thing about having an elder as part of the process. That it seems like everybody always calms down when the elder's there. And they all listen to the elder as soon as they start talking. And so some sort of great mediator or something that's gonna make the process a little bit digestible, rather than really kind of coming at each other and accusing and pointing fingers, and and just creating a harsher situation for everyone. And I mean, we're pretty emotional people, I'd say, in the art world. That's a generalization, but that's also kind of what feeds the art monster, I guess. So but it's just, I guess, tackling the situation as best you can, and to try and really respect the artists, because in the end they're the most important ones to our jobs. So
Thank you, Dana and Doug, for stepping in about that comment around it's harder to stick around and take accountability, and the particular challenges institutions face with volunteer-run boards who handle the cleanup job for a variety of issues, as we've all seen, not just in Vancouver, but all over. And then in Dana, your situation, that stepping in and taking the reins as the new leader of how to mend a relationship that perhaps wasn't yours to begin with, but has to now become like this weird amalgamated, you are the institution is you, and when you leave, it will live on in a different way. I think this all goes to a really great segue to the other half of our title of the assembly, of repair. So when we don't care, or maybe we care too much, I think I wrote down earlier our attempt to repair the difference between two different types of communities. One is the community or the person that that you were there, you had that relationship. And the other is the community that is a blanket statement, is for you, your institution, one that has not had a relationship, and for that reason is an issue. And not that there are just these two kinds of relationships, but in particular, I'm seeing these emerge as perhaps the most distinct forms of where institutions are at in the sense of repairing, one with the community that they've yet to really build that relationship with in a meaningful way, and the other with one where perhaps trust was broken. And I don't have a really great provocation other than just trying to pull up the concept around repair in relationship to care, and the manifesto, strategies, tools of moving towards that practice of repair, knowing, we will get it wrong, and how you hold your positions as people with some sort of power or as individuals, that you tread into bold territory, knowing you'll make a mistake and understanding how you will pick up those pieces or repair, or what that looks like for you in your practice, either historically or as you see kind of like your foresight moving ahead. I'll also let that stew as you think about the question.
Yeah, I can tell I'm getting to the end of the day here. Okay, well, I don't like. So I feel like I gave a really good analogy just before this question. Yeah, I guess just obviously good lines of communication with between board staff and the artists. However, that feels most comfortable. The only thing that pops up to my head, and it wasn't even really because of me. Like I took an artist down in Santa Fe, and she got programmed. Like we wrote her down, but a lot of other people kind of piggybacked on the opportunity that she was there, and even that's why I still felt like it was kind of my responsibility to make sure she was okay. In some of the second and third performances that she was programmed from other organizations, one of the organizations, she's a very intense player. They actually just programmed her again for Louis Blanche, which is Laura Ortman. And she plays the violin, and she's very intense. Like it's not like classically trained. She is classically trained, but it's not classical music that she plays. Like it's very kind of experimental, in your face, kind of raw, and really big energy. And before she performed, they ran up to her and said, "Can you tone it down a bit?" And for her to have been told that is like one of her, that's one of the things that just really irritates her to the core, because that's, you're kind of shutting her down before she begins. And obviously you're not respecting her process, the way she produces her art form. And so she was so visibly upset before she was supposed to go on. And even though it wasn't my programming at that time, even though I still felt a responsibility as the curator to, make sure she was okay and just try to once again talk her down, try to get focused onto, the situation that she had to still go through. And unfortunately, she did adhere to their request, but she still performed in such an amazing way that it blew people away. And then other people started looking more at her work and apologized after for doing that to her. So it was good that they acknowledged and that they came back to her. So I think just learning through somebody else's kind of mistake or just inept way of dealing with her art form really kind of taught me how to just, really kind of respect the artist. And they might move like, especially with performance art. I always say, like, if performance art is making me uncomfortable, I know something really good is happening. And sometimes like that doesn't translate well to the audience. It really might offend the audience. And how do we work around that, and still appreciate what the artist is doing, but also maybe that other part too, we're caring for the audience as well and what we're trying to convey to them. And is it right, or is it politically hinging on something that's not correct? So there's so many areas where anything could go wrong. But yeah, and then once again, the audience, this idea of care of the audience as well. So
Thanks, Daina. Doug?
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic that the idea of repair and care brings up. I do need to declare, because of my involvement with Live and the board, and my portion of the design of this, the idea of an assembly at this time, during a kind of a leadership transition and reviewing the model of how a festival operates or how Live is operating. There's a lot going on just in that alone during COVID, and all of these different factors and logistics that we're working with. And so I just to declare that, yes, I'm aware of the term and repair and care, and participated in some of the brainstorming around it, and support that this is what we're looking to kind of explore and provide an opportunity to bring our community or communities together to talk about what we're talking about. This is a great conversation of kind of looking into what goes on and what considerations are we going through while we do this work. So part of this, in my kind of reading and my kind of conceptualizing of repair and care, is that we are making visible the practices of care that go into the work that we're doing. And Dana and I are kind of giving examples of that, considerations, working closely with artists. The repair part, to me, I have to admit, at the moment, it's kind of catching me, like, that with when we're talking about truth and reconciliation, like reconciliation is kind of an assumption that until we really understand the truth of what happened, to me, the reconciliation, and where I'm kind of equating the repair part, is a bit of an assumption that we can repair it, or there's something to repair, or repair is going to a state that is already kind of known, or going back to something that was known. And I think I want to move it in the direction that, the things that are breaking often need to break. Some of the things that I've been involved with, it is a dismantling, it's a deconstructing, it's a unprogramming the colonized kind of mind from my own perspective, right? And that is, those breakages and those things need to stay not reanimated. They need to kind of change, and they need to be reabsorbed. So in a way, maybe I'm wanting to kind of provide the opportunity for this repair to be a way to kind of collectively, as individuals participating in these collective actions, a way to kind of reform and reanimate, and sometimes just hold the stuff there, not put it anywhere just yet, just let it sit there. And I'd like to think that that's kind of what this process and the assembly is providing, an opportunity to, instead of just like, let's keep going because art needs to happen and artists want to do stuff. That's all true, and I don't want to take away that agency from anyone, but I feel like there is a good opportunity to just kind of sit with some of this, what the pandemic and all kinds of different changes, people having to make life altering decisions to kind of really take care of themselves and make decisions that maybe they would otherwise not want to make, but for their own self-care. So this idea of repairing, maybe just that idea of making difficult decisions, or making decisions that are caring for yourself or caring for your organization, is an action of repair. So yeah, I'm trying to just take the repair out of like reanimating back into the same things that were before, but deconstructing so that we can look at stuff and spend time. Like I mentioned in my notes, I wanted to mention coming into this, I had to keep telling myself just to think positively and constructively and to chill out, because it gets so easy to get hyper with some of these things that I've learned through my own process of grieving, of caring, of the work that we've been doing around here at Open Space, and the work that we've been doing with Live, that it is learning about myself and these reactions that would front themselves and cause the issues that I would then have to go and fix. So it's like trying to identify these behaviors and dissolve them a little bit, so that I'm not just having to fix stuff all the time. So
yeah, sometimes we get so caught up with speaking we forget to be present. I'm going to take a quick pause for us to have a little body break for both panelists and anyone else here. I'm going to put on a really good song, at least I think it's a good song, and we'll take about, I'd say, like 3 to 5 minutes. If you need to go get a drink, go use the washroom, if you'd like, you can be here and dance. I'm going to stretch. My neck is, I'm doing this because I'm trying to hold my head up. So feel free. We'll definitely be back by 3:35 Pacific. If not 3:33, we'll see how it goes. Okay. And as you come back, those in the audience will start to take any questions or thoughts that you have. Welcome back. Welcome back. Thank you, Shaka Khan. So I'm going to open up the ability for Q&A. If there are anyone in the audience who has a question, they can either click on that ask a question button right below Doug and you'll pop up and be on mic, or you can share it in the chat by clicking that chat icon. While we hold space for that to happen, I'm going to pass it back to, I guess, Doug and Daina. If there were maybe questions that emerged between what the two of you had shared, I'm happy to just want to hold space to see if there was anything that came out that you're still going, I have a question about this, or there's a rumination that's happening for me, either based on what's happened over the last kind of 90 minutes, or perhaps something that emerged in that panel that we had in the morning. I know it's near the end of the day, so we'll also be kind to ourselves.
I know, if I could just say briefly, part of what I was interested in with the assembly and participating in the today's kind of themes, around care and repair, and for Daina and I to be talking about organizations, I think what it is of interest to me is that we are sharing different models. We are sharing our experiences and ways of doing things, so that we can kind of step away from this idea that there are only specific ways to present performance art or to manage an organization that does present performance art. Because I think as we learn, through interactions and collaborations with other people, there's all kinds of ways to do things, and the more examples you have in your inventory, the better you can navigate what comes about, right? And I think what I've learned working with colleagues in this arts discipline is that you want to be kind of ready for anything in a way, but not to be kind of tanking or risking everything in a bad way to do that, right? So it takes a certain strength and agility and consideration. So I would kind of encourage people to to share their experiences, and that Live has created the platform as a way to do this. I guess it's my way to kind of just promote that on behalf of Live, but also just to kind of provide that space that comes with having colleagues in the arts and being a part of a network, and what that means, and maybe a way to think a little bit about that. We can critique it and challenge it in terms of who's considered in these things, but I think we still need to be connected, and we still need to find ways to do that. So yeah, just sharing and using these tools that we have.
Thanks, Doug. It's a nice reminder that sometimes we get caught in the binary of there is a right and a wrong way. Hi, Kate. I see you down there. Welcome back. Feel free to share your question.
Thanks. Hi. Thank you so much. Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Daina, for the panel. Thank you, Brian, for mediating. My question is around models for care for the audience. And I was just wondering if we could go a little bit deeper with that. We know that performance art audiences work really hard, and that performance artists often, deal with really tough issues and issues outside of the mainstream, and it can be really triggering being in an audience. And I mean, even to further that, I'm even wondering if performance art as a relational practice can offer any sort of models around decolonization, of of the performance itself or the space in that taking care of the audience. Just wondering if you have any thoughts around that. Thanks.
Thanks, Kate. So correct me if there were two questions in there. One was a model of care for the audience.
Yeah.
And the other as performance art as a relational practice for decolonial methodologies.
Yeah, around care and practice. I'm sure we've all been to an event where it's a really tough performance to get through. Like Dana said, if you're being disrupted, something good is happening. At least there's some emotionality and passion there. But even it can even go even further where it's triggering, or what Doug said, like ready for anything to happen, but we don't want to risk the whole organization for a performance that just went sideways really quickly or something. But I guess really what my question is just I'm thinking about the audience and caring for them.
Right. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of really good instances that might be a good analogy. I mean, that is a tough one, and even though I'm the one that brought it up, still like
it's a tough one. And also, like, do you put warning signs, like trigger warnings? Like, I always felt weird about that, but are they necessary?
Me too.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been like, I guess maybe then that's when you really turn to the artists and ask them, like, obviously really find out what the piece is gonna, like, going into the piece, what the intention is, and then like how do they want that, because in a way that's almost like censorship. And we've done that for certain exhibitions where we've said, like, look, because a lot of grade schools hit us up all the time and want to come bring the class through, and and it's been this like really kind of intense piece on sexuality of some sort, and it's like we don't want, we've been worried about, like, the teachers don't seem to have so much an issue with it, but I've heard parents of finding out late, like a week later, that their kids went to saw this exhibition that they just totally feel like was not appropriate for young eyes to see, and that's been like kind of, we've always been kind of a little worried with that, but thankfully it's worked out. But I can understand, parents want to know what their children are getting exposed to, and maybe that's part of the school's responsibility to let them know what they're walking into, or parents, like, letting their youth come to some crazy performance art piece, and there's naked people running around everywhere or something like that, like it's just wondering, like, where it's really hard to define those areas, and to like how, because if you don't know how the performance is going to be, because even the artist itself is working intuitively, it's like it is like a very kind of, for sure, testy area to try and navigate through. I'll give it that much. I don't know if that's very helpful, but I know that there are these situations that exist.
And Dana, I just want to maybe dig a bit closer into the first part of you were talking about, like, I don't know, do we do content warnings? Can you maybe just share a bit about what don't you know? Like, what is that question when it comes to content warnings for work when you're programming?
Yeah, because I feel like that is a type of censorship of the artist, and I don't want to infringe on the artist's right to express what they want to express, but like, who am I to decide who should see this or not see this, and do we have to put that there? Can people just be open enough just to come see the performance, and if it affects them in a really great way or a really bad way, then where do we move from there? Like, should we, like, be that kind of policing of the audience? So it's a really big question. If anybody else has information on that would be really great to hear.
I have lots of provocations, but okay. I want to pass it over to
Doug. Yeah, no, it's a good question, and it really makes me think about again, these assumptions that we have when we're talking about a performance art festival or a work itself. And you know, in my, you know, as each of you are speaking, in my mind, I'm kind of thinking, yeah, you know, I know artists that make work that is just for a very specific audience, you know, very kind of considered, like, I just want to make it for these people. And you're like, okay, that sounds good. Uh, and so then, so the assumption that all art is meant to be consumed by everybody all the time in any way, you know, I think it's not fair to artists. It's not fair to the performance art form itself. It doesn't mean that you can't do something, but I think it is a little bit, yes, it is the work of the support systems and of the festivals and of the curators and of the, you know, the artists themselves to a certain degree, to a certain parameter, that you are considering whom you are engaging with, right? I think it is a, you know, curious assumption that you can just do whatever you want wherever you want. And I think maybe this is a way of like flipping the questions back on the artists themselves to say, well, what's so important about your work that you have to do it to everybody, or it has to be accessible to everybody? Why can't we say, you know, or position some things to say, yeah, you know, how is this going to be read, right? So there's that kind of working with the logistics around the presentation. But it's also making me think too about, you know, as I think Kate, you've said here, like contextualizing the work. What we can't also just assume that all audiences they're not watching Netflix and they're not watching, you know, sitcoms. They're to respect the art forms again, to say this is not, sometimes it's not easy to watch, or sometimes it's going to bring up things that you maybe weren't expecting. So that assumption that anybody can just walk in and, you know, and then you're like, oh man. So that work, I don't have any, you know, clear like specific strategies to share about that, other than it brings us back to what we've been talking about, is building the relationship with the work, with the artists. I think we can all kind of bring up projects in our pasts when things were rushed, all the checks and balances weren't maybe in place, and something happened and you're like, yeah, no, you know, sure, I could have gotten ahead of that a bit differently. So we know there's lots of examples of that. It's like me paying more attention to talk to the artist about the content of that work would have given me a better heads up of how to navigate that thing. So there's always that kind of reflexive back on our own process. But you know, that's just a good practice, I guess, to build the understanding and relationships. But it does make me think at a kind of a deeper level what it is that we think the art form is and can do, and why can't we be critical ourselves, right? Of who do we think that can be exposed to this work, or should we just be randomly exposed to it? And I'm saying this from doing things in public where, no, sometimes I'm like, yeah, I got to be careful where I go here, because it's starting to look like something else that I don't want it to look like, right? So you can really, you got it. Yeah, it's being responsible, I guess, in that way.
Thanks, Kate. Does that feel like yes? Okay, great. Also happy if there's other folks from the audience who want to pop up. We can hold space for that. But there is a good, I think, provocation Kate put into contextualization, and it even makes me think about the different intersections of vocabularies audience come into this space with, and the support structures, the venue, the institution needs to consider that if someone has a particular response, you know, or you have the resources to support them, even just leaving. Like I'd say like the unwritten rule of performance is, you know, don't do anything, be quiet, and leave when it's over, which performance art practices actively challenge a lot of those notions of what it means to be in relationship as an audience. But for the new audience member or the unversed, that's a different territory. I think when we think about care, that's a new relationship. There's maybe not a relationship that is something that we can call back to in the same way.
I like that you're kind of giving the audience the agency to decide for themselves whether they participate or not, right? That it's, you know, that if you're coming across something, you're in a room cross-legged on the floor, you can get up and leave, and it's not going to, you know, you're not going to disrespect the work. It's just you've found your own boundaries, you know.
But it's almost like, you know, and not to be crude, when you go to a male urinal, you don't stand next to the guy who's peeing. There's an unwritten, there's
You
like
don't need to.
an unwritten rule that, you know, you go to the other one, or now in COVID that we've got this 6 feet of distance. So in performance, there are these things that were like, oh, you know, why is that person unwrapping a piece of candy? Like, stop it.
Mhm.
Pay respect, you know? Yes, you don't have to sit on the cement floor. Thank you, Kate. or the dirty parking garage, or wherever you are. Again, happy to hold space. This is a good time if folks have questions, provocations. Maybe there is something that's still percolating from this morning if you were here. This is the space to bring that up. But again, back to Doug and Dana, if there are other things still, you know, coming to the surface for the two of you.
I'm not sure how much this is repair. I guess it could be. Because I just keep hearing this word manifesto, and it just takes me back to, like, you know, art school learnings and old manifestos from back in the day, even if it's been centuries ago. I was thinking, what if even Live creates its own repair and care manifesto, and that could be something, a document of some sort that, you know, people can add to, or a living document that, you know, exists, and best practices. Because I think there's such an incredible community of knowledge people here that exist within Live, on the board and the staff and the community, that, you know, like there's a lot of knowledge that we all share, and instances that can really be, you know, really helpful for going forward to navigate really tough situations. So.
And you yourself are still thinking about what your manifesto is, Dana?
I'm making my own. Maybe I should. I probably should make my own too.
Yeah, every 10 years we need to come back to, what was I thinking when I was younger?
Yeah.
I also like to think of, just in terms of holding this space, there's a spiritual Quaker practice where those of you who are familiar with Quakers, their ceremonies, they sit in silence for up to an hour, and people rise to speak as they feel called for. But sometimes a whole hour passes and no one says anything. And I once spoke to a Quaker leader, and he was saying how these moments of silence are like sometimes dropping a pebble in the middle of a lake, and that small pebble takes a lot of time for the ripple to reach your shore. And I just try to come back to this, especially in virtual spaces, that silence is an active presence of us waiting for something to come to us. That it's not, as perhaps Doug, we were talking about earlier, slowing down. We don't need to be talking the whole time. We can listen to how our body is moving, and sometimes it's the end of the day. So.
And I want to thank Chris, Kurt, and Kelly for also doing that, starting that off this morning. It was really, really awesome.
I've got a question from Brady. I'm wondering about the second part of the title for this section, Unanticipated Spaces. How does this impact our care and repair? Specifically, is it often easier to be accountable in real space where one is present in person? So I'll say that again. In the title, Unanticipated Spaces, how does this impact our care and repair? Specifically, is it easier to be accountable in real space where we are present in person? So the distinction between being kind of virtually distant and unaccountable, and perhaps present and accountable. Doug or Dana?
Or audience.
Or audience. I know Chris is down there still.
I can kind of just touch on it's a good question, because it's like this last year and all the Zoom meetings, and you know, I've had the experience of working with colleagues in person, and then you see them not in person, but you know who they are, so it's a bit easier. And then other gatherings or groups now where I've not met the people. So there's a bit of that, accountability in that space of engaging with people and trying to do some work. But I also, through a long time ago now, the Second Front Avatar Performance Group, that kind of was like one of the basic things that we were playing around with. Like, what did it mean to be, how were you accountable in a virtual environment that seemed to have no rules? And it was a really interesting kind of research process for kind of online spaces. And, at the time it brought up, the notion of griefing. And this is like 2006 to 8 kind of time. So it's like internet history now. But it did bring up that, like, how do these virtual spaces affect, and create other ways of engagement, and the idea of online spaces and not anonymity. Like, there's just so much more about that now that I feel like it's kind of coming around to where, for myself to answer this question, it would be that I still have a certain consciousness and sense of ethics, whether I am in a virtual environment or not. But I think a little bit of that comes from respecting my own practice, or respecting the work that I do with others, and not thinking that I can hide behind a virtual space or a mediated exchange, right? Because I think it's not fair to the history of the media arts to say that this is a new thing and that we can kind of get away with stuff, because artists have been playing with media and mediated spaces and the nuances of these mediated spaces for quite a while. So I think there's work out there. Just to say that specifically to this context right now, or how do we go moving forward? I think we're going to get a bit more experience in the hybridity of presentations, and I think it's a good exercise in how we as audiences and artists think about mediated consciousnesses, or mediated memories, or mediated participation. And really makes you think about, in a way, like, who is the audience, how is the audience, or with Chris Crichton Kelly's question of when is art, like, when is the audience? Like, we're saying things now that somebody's going to watch 8 days from now, and so how will that kind of be carried over? It's a really interesting kind of question. I think I just fold it back in to say these are things that we should certainly be considering and putting into the process of development, like putting it on the table to think about. And maybe that's what I'm hoping that comes out of some of this assembly, is that we have some ideas of things to put on the table to consider, and not just jump to assume to flip models, but to kind of really take a look at things. So, but thank you for that question. It's a good expansion of ideas.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that question earlier today, like how do you do an acknowledgement? I'm sorry, I'm reiterating probably incorrectly, but just in a virtual space or a virtual world. And just to definitely follow up on what Doug says, I think we do have that responsibility to acknowledge where is our physical being at that moment. And I mean, for probably international participants, that's going to be look a little different. But within Canada, like I said, like, even me participating in this discussion, but knowing I'm in Winnipeg, like, I have to acknowledge where am I located right now, and where am I participating from. So I think it is very easy to be in a virtual world and still give an acknowledgement, because you exist somewhere. You're coming into the space somehow. So yeah, I think that's probably the best way to deal with that, at least in Canada, States, where maybe Indigenous peoples exist. But yeah, even then, maybe if you're from that country.
Unless you're having an existential crisis.
Maybe, yeah.
The egg behind me.
I've disassociated, so well, I want to sort of like maybe hone in a focus for a close, and then also moving forward in the next 2 days. I'm curious, coming out of today, whether from this session or the earlier ones, what is your intention, or what is a hopeful intention moving forward? That, I guess my challenge is something you're not currently doing, and you want to put into practice. This is a 2 degrees shift in the ship that you're moving that will change your course. What that wants to be, which you may or may change. I know Daina, like, make a manifesto, so.
Well, sort of. I don't know. Like, I know I'm doing this on both things on some level, but definitely I need to do better active listening and make more performance art.
Yeah, the active listening and not always trying to find answers. I think sometimes as I was imagining with the repair, taking that apart, like kind of just getting more or exercising more the idea of just living with things in sway, and in together, not having to displace. Now I'm saying this also from a position of having been thinking about this a lot over the last little while. So Brian, I feel like I'm answering your question with something I decided a few months ago, but then who knows, right? Just
you're late. You need to have
temporarily,
already been doing it.
yeah.
You gotta pick a new one.
Yeah. So now from that perspective, looking at it, yeah, but I think what I like is the challenge of just being open to the possibilities of what can be, in my, I don't want to frame it like in terms of what is art in that sense, but it is like, as this conversations this morning and as the institutions, like just that being more open to the possibilities of what these things can be. Sometimes the anxiety I have in a position of responsibility or, in a management or operating something, is that it's like you get anxious because you feel like that form that you're maintaining is going to disappear. And if you don't have that form, well, then what do you have, right? And I think it causes a lot of anxiety of kind of going, oh, I got to maintain this thing. But sometimes that's the problem, that you're maintaining a form that doesn't need to be there anymore. So I would say I want to be more open to and exercise that idea of just being present somehow is a justification of being itself. And you don't have to have it in the roles or in the formations or in the object or, even in the action, right? But it's hard. I feel like it's coming with maturity, and I'm also running a lot more and in that space of kind of existential contemplation of a body in motion over time and for how long.
Physically running.
Yeah.
Cool.
And it's really, pushing me into spaces where I'm like, wow, you want to just open the door on the foreverness by just going outside and running for a little bit. But it's good. It's
awesome.
But it's deep. I'm saying it's deep. But yeah, I think just being more creative in how we program, I am a real component or supporter of the idea of artists run culture, because it's using artists' ways of thinking, doing, imagining, philosophies to imagine these structures, to deal with the bureaucracies or the municipality, or sometimes it's hard because you still got to pay the bills or get things done, but maybe I want to be more creative in how we administer.
Wow, lots of intentions. Thanks, Doug and Daina. Personally, I want to be more unafraid to engage. So thanks everyone for coming. That's closing off day 1 of the live assembly. So happy that those of you who could be here with us in this screen, and for those of you who are in the future, thank you for watching. We're back again tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. Pacific, with 2 more events, and then also our annotating the archive midday. The schedule is all available on the livebiennale.ca website. It's still the same link, so we'll see you again tomorrow morning. And yeah, thanks again, Doug and Daina. This was a really great conversation.
Thank you,
and
Brian.
Thank you for engaging. Yeah.
Thank you. It was great. Thank you, everyone. See you all tomorrow.
Thank you, everyone. Such amazing.
Thank you, Ellen. Yeah.
Have a good evening.
Bye, everyone.